it open. Like, bro. Cool. Oh, thank God you have a mouse. Yeah, we're going to talk about pixel art today. So my name is Dane. I gave the Intro to Unity presentation here. I'm the treasurer.
Hi, my name is Mark. I'm the liaison, which means I talk to other clubs, but we never do that, so I don't do anything.
That's a very good job. Anyway. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about pixel art today, but if you want to just like doodle, that's fine, because this is art. It's like a lot of kind of technical stuff, but it's all like subjective stuff that you don't have to follow. So if you want to doodle, go ahead. Also, doodling is good. So we're going to talk a little bit about the origins of pixel art. It really started out of necessity of like graphics cartridges having limitations on how much stuff they could hold and limited color palettes, and like that's why you get games like Zelda that just have like very minimal colors, adventure, minimal colors, minimal style, very squarey, very blocky, very nice. Nowadays though, we have 3D graphics, but people still make pixel art games because it is easier and cheaper. You don't need like a dedicated artist. It helps to have artistic skill if you're going to do pixel art, but for like lower quality stuff, you don't need someone specifically doing art all the time. You can make a lot of sprites in a short amount of time to quickly prototype. Like all these Shovel Knight tiles down here could probably be made in like a day, and then you can quickly prototype this level. Doesn't really require any expensive software. I'm going to be using MS Paint today for my demo. You can too. There are a bunch of other programs. The one I mainly use is Pixel, P-Y-X-E-L. Photoshop is pretty good, I've heard. You use one that's really strange and out there.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and yeah, games like Shovel Knight mainly play off pixel art as a nostalgia thing as well, which is something you can design for. Pixel art has some historical influences. So cross-stitching patterns, you've probably seen those like, welcome to our home, or it's the only context I've seen them in. There's mosaics as well, which are not on a grid, but they are still blocks that connect to make a whole. And beadwork as well follows a similar grid structure, although often it's like offset, so it's like hexy. That's cool. So one of the things I'm really into when it comes to pixel art is using tile sets. So there are a couple tiles in this screen of Mario. There's these block tiles up here. There's the question mark tile. There's the ground tile. There's, I think, 6 tiles for this. No, there's 4. 6 in the other one. There's 4 for this pipe, and then there's 1 for that, and 3 for the bush. So that's like, what, 10 tiles for this entire screen? Most of the entire level is made up of these 10 blocks. And you could probably make these 10 blocks really easily, really fast, and be able to prototype a Mario level super quick, like in a day or something, which is crazy. Also, we take shortcuts when making pixel art. So these clouds and bushes are the same thing in Mario, same sprite, if you didn't know that already. It's one of my favorite little tricks that game developers do. Yeah, it's really good. And we're gonna just quickly jump into a demo where I'm gonna do a tile set in Paint. So, one of the worst things about Paint is that you can only zoom in 800%, so it's kind of small. So we talked a little bit about like what tile sets are. The most important thing when making a tile set is that you have them all be the same aspect ratio, or they're all squares, I guess, but you have them all be the same width and height. So if you draw a box, every tile should be this size. What size is this actually? We're gonna do a power of 2. Do you know why we do power of 2? I forget the exact reason. It's compression, yeah. Compression math. Yeah, I don't know exact reasons. Let's do 16 by 16 actually, because that's way easier. 4 times as easy. Yes. There are fancier programs that let you do this a lot faster and easier. Huh? I have not used Pixel. Pixel? Sprite is also good. Yes, they are expensive.
How did you make those outlines?
You can select the size when you're drawing a line. I actually started and only used Paint for like 2 years when I was making pixel art originally, so it's perfectly good to use. It's great. I'll fight anyone who says otherwise. So I'm just going to set up a few boxes here. That's not and you notice it like covers it up like that, but you can go select transparent selection right there. Yeah, I know, sorry. So if you go select transparent selection, it makes the background color here transparent to paint, not when you export it though. I just drew a square and then I'm copying and pasting it. Wow. And the reason there's 2 pixels here, 2 black pixels, is because this is going to be a tile right here, and then this is also going to be a tile. So you're going to make sure you have 2 pixels in between and then 1 pixel on the outside. Yeah. You don't have to use MS Paint. MS Paint is just my version of the easiest software to use.
Also, Ben doesn't have any art software.
I'm not gonna buy Photoshop size.
Okay, so we're gonna do like a simple ground tile. This is the one I used to make. Oh, that's not cool. This is one I used to use all the time, just to like for prototyping things. So we're gonna have a background color, or like a ground color, I guess, of brown. I'm just gonna fill in all these tiles. Nice. And then we're gonna have a grass texture. It's too much. So I'd imagine this would be for like a platform where the grass is on top, and then we have ground underneath. This is witchcraft. This is squares. This is literally just squares. And then we're gonna imagine that this is like a skyblock, I guess. It's floating up and it has like grass growing on top of it, and it is made of dirt, and so it has to stay together somehow. That's what this is. That's what we're shooting for. That's how you do lines. So it has grass. This is gonna be like the worst pixel art I've ever done in my life. And grass kind of comes down a little bit like that. This is great. I love it. Yeah, we got grass now. Dirt also has what is it? Little bits in it. So we're gonna draw some little bits. And we're gonna make sure that these bits that we're drawing don't overlap, because these are gonna have to tile. So if you stack them against each other, they're gonna have to line up pretty well. So if I take this tile right here, and I make a bunch of them, they should line up pretty well. And advanced software will like update these for you, but we're in Paint. Where's the delete? There. Okay. It is my greatest accomplishment. And I'm also going to erase some of this as well. And we'll just like jaggy it. This is beautiful. All right, so we got a little blocky island thing. I hope no one takes a picture of this. All right. Yikes. All right, so now we can use these tiles to map out a level, I guess. Really bad level, but bad looking level. It can be great level design though. I'm just copying and pasting those tiles based on the grid. This is true. This is what we're getting to. I'm just going to put this one here. So when we got a problem we might have. No, go back. All right. So now what about this space right here? We kind of need a tile that'll go between those two, and none of these will really work, right? So if I take this one and I put it here, it kind of looks a little bit off. So one common thing is to have these 9 tiles here, and then to have 4 more that we can use as inside corners. Not you. So we're just going to make those over here. Nope. This is most of my pixel art. Just going, nope. And so what these tiles will do is they will provide a nice little end to our grass texture. All right, so now if I take this tile here, copy paste it. Oh, it's not the right size. Oh well. And we have a nice little grass texture, and that's what we use inside corners for. So these, 13 tiles is pretty much like the standard set for making tile sets. You use these 13, and you can make any level that you want, basically. There's some variation if you want to make like beams that come out of grass, I guess, like pillars, like single column pillars. Then you have like up to 256 combinations that you can do, but don't do that because it's bad and a lot of work. Yeah, it's ridiculous because it's 2 to the power of 8. Because you have to factor in every single combination of every other tile that's around it. So on or off is 2, and then 8. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's crazy. Don't do it. And that's basically what tile sets are and how you can use them. Can I save this to your desktop? It says your wallpaper. Thank you. Huh? Oh right. Okay. So we're just gonna make this into something that Mark can use later. All right, so Mark is going to use this and import it into Unity later. So we're going to show you guys how to do that. And for that, I'm going to decrease these black lines, or get rid of them, and line everything up so it's on the same grid. You could keep the lines, I guess. Wait, hold on. These tiles weren't on a. I don't think these were the right size. Yeah, so. What I'm going to do is just, so these tiles are the wrong size, so I'm just going to increase their size a little bit. So I'm done. Yeah. This is fine. Anyway, and then we're going to line them all up so that they're all on a similar grid. I can use the arrow keys to move this selection around if I want. Paint tricks. Paint is great. All right.
There's a white pixel. It's part of the dirt. It's a diamond in the rough.
All right. Saving to desktop. What are we calling this? Bad grass. Okay. I have like a couple more things I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to pass it over to Mark. So sprite sheets are kind of like the tile sheet. So what we just created here is kind of like our tile sheet, and that we have all of the tiles there, and we can go through and use these tiles to make our level. Sprite sheets are kind of a similar thing where everything is sort of aligned to a grid, and then we can use this grid to like loop through the different sprites to create an animation. So this would be a jumping animation, a landing animation, a running animation. You can also do animation with parts. Oh, no, back. Which isn't sort of like a pixel thing, but it's a good animation technique that doesn't require you to have all these different frames. And just if anyone is going to be super triggered by this, magenta. So magenta used to be used as a transparency color because no one would dare look at magenta in a game. So now we use this like grayed out gray and white grid because it's much like no one's going to use this in a game. Like it's just a terrible color to look at. Nobody appreciates it.
I think that's great.
So it used to be used as our transparency color, which is why sometimes you'll see magenta used in like the background of assets because that was meant to be transparent and they didn't have an alpha channel. Yeah.
Mine's that's you.
That is me as well. Sorry. Another common thing is a 9 slice. So this scalable box here explains it pretty well. I could like try and explain it, but I'm not very good at it apparently. So these corners here, they stay fixed in place and then all the edges scale out. So if you have this dialog box here and you want to make it bigger, the corners would stay the same and then the edges in the center would scale to fit. It can use our pillars as well, so you can like do the corners and then scale it up. And it can also be used for microwaves. Figure that one out.
Okay, hey everybody. I'm just going to be covering some like techniques and tools of the trade for any pixel artists or aspiring pixel artists out there. So the first one that I'm sure most of you know about is pretty basic, is anti-aliasing. You're going to want to anti-alias your art because anti-aliasing is that, so you see on the right, the whole like fuzzy sort of like interpolates the colors, like there's like all these gray pixels and stuff and it looks real ugly. Don't do that. In most softwares, there's like a setting. In Unity, I think there is, and we're gonna cover that later. Yeah, also smoothing colors. Yeah, we'll cover that later too. So some old tricks, but you can still use them to create a stylized look for your pixel art game is dithering. This is a technique that artists used to use when they had much more limited color palettes. Like when they were limited to like, I forget, like 16 colors or something like that. So they had to like sort of make these little patterns to make gradient effects. And they're not needed anymore because, you know, we have, what is it, 24-bit color or something like that. But it still creates a cool stylized look and it's a thing you can do. We're going to be going through like the sort of asset creation process right now. I'm not going to be making anything, but I'm going to be showing you the steps that I would take to making a character. So we're going to start with silhouettes. This applies to pixel, not just pixel art, but pretty much any character design or like, you know, weapon designs too. So an important principle is you want your items to have strong silhouettes. You want them to be recognizable at a glance because, you know, when people are playing games, things are fast-paced. You need to recognize instantly what character you're facing up against. So here you have an example. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Overwatch, and I'm sure many of you recognized most of these characters. Overwatch is really good for their character design in that their characters have really strong silhouettes. Like you can see D.Va's neck, you can see Reinhardt, you can see, you know, all those other characters. And that's true of pixel art too. So you got this little dude in the top right. It's pretty clear that it's a dude. And that's not just because it has eyes. You can see the arms, legs are clear. They're spread apart, so you can see the individual limbs, etc. So just a good tip to follow when making characters. So line art is optional. Some people, like me, avoid using line art just to make a stylized effect. But in lots of games, it's a common tool to use. Some tips are when you're making curves to have an even step size. So you see on the bottom left, you're sort of making like a segment of a circle. And if you look at the pixels and count them, you can see like it steps by 2, and then by 1 pixel, and by 2 pixels, and then by 1 pixel again. You want to avoid having some weird irregular stepping there. You want to transition evenly from like a 4 to a 3 to a 2 or something like that. You also want your lines to have an even step size. So you want like even segments with like 2 pixels and 2 pixels as opposed to changing between different step sizes because it looks real jaggy, at least if you're looking at pixel art, because you see each individual pixel. Also, line thickness. This is also something that is sort of, depending on the style that you're trying to make, either could be, all right, but generally you want to stick to 1 pixel dimension lines. So avoid like the different thicknesses. Make sure it's consistent throughout. So the next step would be adding color to your images. One tip is when you're actually drawing the art, to use a neutral background to avoid having your colors look real weird. Like in the top right, that's actually an optical illusion. Both those center squares are actually the same color, even though they do look different because of the context that they're in. And context is a huge thing to take into account when you're making assets. Because as you can see on the bottom left, if you were making a character for that game, I don't think that Pikachu sprite would be very fitting with the setting. Maybe that's the point. Maybe you're trying to make some counterculture thing. But most of the time, you're not trying to do that. Most of the time, he's doing his best. But most of the time, you want your assets to fit in with the rest of the game. Eventually, we want to make good games, right, guys? I hope so. Some other tips are once you get to the coloring phase, you might realize that some lines are unnecessary. As you can see on the bottom right, the color difference sort of makes a line itself. So having an extra black line there can make it look sort of blaring and obtrusive. So that's another tip. So moving on, similar to color, we have the color palette you're picking. We have some real cool art here from a real cool game. So there could be a whole talk on color palettes and stuff. But we're just going to cover some really basic color palettes. You have the complementary color palette, in which you take colors that are on the opposite ends of the color wheel, and that tends to create a very striking, vibrant effect, as you can see at the bottom left with that weird glowy thing. And you also have analogous color palettes, which are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, and those color schemes tend to be more calming or relaxed. Yeah, I'll just skip ahead. Shading. This is also sort of in the coloring section, but it's detailed enough where I made an entire slide devoted to it. So there are a couple styles. With pixel art, banding is pretty common because of the granularity that you get with pixel art. You see the individual pixels, and it looks real weird if everything's like all gradient-y because it looks real jagged. So a lot of people tend to stick with using like 4 colors to make lighting and shading. As you can see on like the center ones, you can see the sort of bottom example on the left is a sort of dithering example. You also have different textures, you could say. In the center, you have different, you have metallic textures where there's a lot of shiny stuff. You got glass, etc. And shading can really change how your game looks. For example, the 2 Pikachus on the right, those would be in vastly different games. Not vastly different, but different. Like if you saw the Pikachu on the top in a shaded game, where the Pikachu on the bottom might fit better, it would look really jarring and unprofessional. So it's good to have an even style throughout your game. Some different perspectives that you can draw in. Because pixel art is usually, you're just drawing from one perspective, you have to stick with the same perspective throughout your asset creation. So, or at least stick with the same general perspective. So you've got top-down, as you can see on the top left. A lot of Zelda games are like this. Some dungeon crawlers. You have isometric on the top right, which is pretty common in like city building games or RTSs or action adventures. You got the side view, which is obviously the classic 2D platformer perspective. And you have some other perspectives like that 2.5D RPG perspective that you see a lot in Pokemon games and stuff like that. Wow, that game looks real cool. Neat. What? Anyway, You also have a bit of mixing perspective sometimes. Like for example here, you've got some funky on the bottom. What game is this? Zelda game? Yeah, Link Between Worlds, I knew that. So if you look at it from the perspective that the camera's not at during gameplay, it looks real funky because everything's all tilted weird. And that's because the camera's locked to one angle, so you don't see it from those weird angles, and it looks sort of better like that because you can see the front faces as well as the top faces. So maybe you're making a game like that, and you'll have to deal with the problems that that kind of perspective brings with it. And like Dane said, everything that we're saying today are just guidelines to get people started. These are not hard rules. You can change these to make different stylized effects. Yeah, do your own thing. So we're going to be covering how to make pixel perfect visuals in Unity. Your first step that you want to do before you make any assets at all is decide right away how many pixels per Unity unit you want, Unity unit, because if you mix that up, you're going to have like weird differences in how your characters and environment objects are scaled. I'll show you that in a bit. And there are some sprite import settings that you're also going to want to use to keep your sprites looking clean and fresh. We'll go through that in a bit. Right now, let's see. How the hell is this? I'll just drink that. So, if anybody wants to follow along, right, yeah. So I'm going to make a new project just to test this out. I'm sure Ben's going to be excited about that. Let's see. Yeah, I'll do it right there. Ben is gone. Oh, he's back there. Okay. It's kind of all stanced up. What are you importing? Anybody have any questions while we're waiting?
I'll go.
Yeah.
Also, should we do 2D or 3D for the Unity template?
Pick 2D. Technically, everything is 3D. 2D is just a locked camera and stuff like that. But yeah, I'd pick 2D for this one since we're making 2D assets. Hi, Ben.
Fun fact about dithering,
Okay.
since nothing else is happening right now. Dithering, so you know how in games things fade away, right? Like think like 3D games, like oh, it's past like the render distance, it's gonna go whoosh. People don't really do that anymore. They actually apply dithering in a shader because it's a lot cheaper to do a dissolve, just like 1 or 0 transition, than applying transparency to objects that are so far away you can't see them anyway. So dithering is cool. Rendering techniques. Buzzword. Goodbye.
That just goes to show that these pixel art techniques can be applied to other artistic disciplines like graphics programming or something. Yeah. All arts is the same. Hey, look, it's the thing. All right, so we've got an empty project here, and what we're gonna do is we're just gonna import the beautiful sprite that Dane drew for us earlier today. Thank you for the asset, Dane. There we go. All right, so you can actually just drag in, I think, right? Yeah, you can. You just drag in an image and it will import. No, not there. It's still there. Look, it's the sprite. No. Fine. I will show them good practices. So, it's a good practice to make sure all your stuff is in the right place. Place for everything and everything in this place. That's what I always say. Sprites. We're gonna have a sprites folder here where we're gonna keep all of our one sprite. Yeah. Why is there? Okay, never mind. Right, so we have this sprite. It's actually a texture. Every image is treated as a texture by Unity, at least in the project folder, the assets folder. So on the right here in the inspector, you can see there are a bunch of different like import settings for this sprite. And here, I'll just show you real quick. If you zoom in quick, real here, that didn't make any sense. If you zoom in real close, you can see that there's a lot of blurring going on where these should be jagged pixels. And that's right, that's anti-aliasing. It's real bad and it's ugly, and we're gonna just turn that off. But if you look in here, there's no anti-aliasing button. What? Yeah, Unity, so there are a couple settings that you need to use when importing sprites. First of all, you want to go to filter mode and use the point filter setting, which is no filter. And boom, isn't that beautiful? Look at that. What do you know? And that should take care of your anti-aliasing problems. And there are some other things too. Like up here, you have pixels per unit. You want all of your assets to have the same pixels per unit setting if you're making a pixel art game. So I like to use 16 because it's a nice little power of 2, and that's a apply. Okay, and your sprites will get very big. Also, there's one more thing, I think. And if you have like really colorful sprites, or sprites at all, just do this to every sprite. Just turn off compression because they're already really small images and you don't need to compress them.
If the colors are closer together, it'll sometimes like merge or flip them. It's really strange.
If you didn't hear that, if the colors are close together, it will merge them or flip them sometimes. It'll make like really weird, like sort of JPEG compression artifacts. It's real gross. So yeah, that's how you do it. I think that's it, right? Could probably cover it. Could slice it, yeah. Do you want to? I don't usually slice up sprites, so you can show that.
So because this is a tile set, I'm just going to slice it real quick. And what that means, when I come to Unity's sprite editor, I'm going to apply these settings first though. And I do this frequently. So I want to slice these into their individual sprites or individual tile sprites. And to do that, we have the slice button here. But if you'll notice, I can't actually click it right now. And that's because we are making a single sprite. And so to change it, we have to make it a multiple sprite. And so we just go sprite mode and multiple. And now we can have more than one sprite coming from this base sprite. That makes sense, right? Whoa, where is that? So you just should be able to click on it here. Okay, cool. Huh? So if you go sprite mode, multiple, and apply, and then you're going to come to the sprite editor, and now we can click the sprite, the slice button. And so you could do it automatically, but that usually doesn't work too well. You can do it by the cell size. So if you know the exact pixel dimensions, you can do it by that. If you sometimes forget or you know exactly how many tiles wide and high it is, you can do by cell count. I usually do it by cell size because it's pretty easy. It's right up. Sprite editor is in this in the inspector here. Once you click on the sprite, and it's right here, sprite editor. All right, and this every tile in this sprite is 16 by 16. So I'm gonna go 16 by 16. And if you have any white space between your individual tiles, you can set offsets and padding. And offset will be in the top, I think it's top left. Yeah, top left. So you can set an offset and that'll just like move where it's slicing from over and down. Or you can set a padding and then it'll be spaced between the individual sprites. And pivot mode is just like where the center of the sprite will be marked. So for each sprite, I want it to be in the center. And I'm going to click slice. And look at that. We got all these sprites now that we can use. Yeah. And now if I come down here and I click on this, I have all these individual sprites that I can use. And I can drag in the individual ones. Those are the same. Yeah. If you're interested, you can talk to me about Unity's tile maps because they're very good for doing tile-based games, but we're kind of out of time right now. That's what tile maps are for. So if you want to grid snap, you can just like set these values here, X and Y. There's no automatic grid snapping, but what you can do is 2D object to tile map, and that'll have some nice grid snapping stuff going on. What?
If you hold the shift key, it actually does snap to grid.
Oh, right. I just don't use
So that's something that I use all the time. Yeah. If you just want to use the transform drag button, yeah, you can just hold the shift and it'll snap. Yeah. Tile. What's this called? Tile maps. Or sprite sheets. Sprite sheets, like I think we mentioned this already, but sprite sheets are not just used for making terrain that's easy to like design up. It's also like critical if you want to animate. And I think we're going to be having an animation. Are we? Animation demo presentation? Yeah, we're planning on having an animation specific presentation for you in the future. So that's a whole nother topic that we'll go into later. But I think that's about it. Hold on, we have some nice pictures. Where the heck? There we go. Right? This is cool. Yeah, so we just have some examples of some cool looking pixel art. Wow, this game looks real neat too. Has anybody seen this game? Anybody recognize this one? Super Time Force. It's also a cool game. We got this one, which I think is coming out soonish. It's in development. Real gritty aesthetic. And we got Terraria. You know, everybody loves Terraria. It's real cool. It's Minecraft, but not. And you can also create some cool, realistic-looking pixel art if you want to go real hard and torture yourself. So yeah. Oh yeah, and there's obviously Celeste. Everybody loves Celeste. And yeah, so just to wrap it up, PixArt's great because you can make assets real quick and dirty. Tile sets are great for creating huge worlds with a limited number of drawings. It's real great for prototyping and stuff. As with any artistic discipline, principles you know from other art is applicable to pixel art, and pixel art is applicable to other art. And that's all, folks. I'm tired. Thank you. Thank you.
If you haven't yet, the sign-in sheet is right there. So if you haven't signed in yet, please do.
Sick. So one last little tidbit of information that can be very helpful sometimes is this this draw mode setting on the sprite render is a drop down. Like you'll notice right now if I scale this, it's like, ooh, gross, stretchy, I don't want that, icky. If you change that to tiled, it will automatically, never mind. Ah, no, I was correct. See how now it's like automatically tiling for you instead of stretching, even though it's, okay, I'm gonna do that here. Tiled. Ready? Ready for this? Magic. So this is really useful because if I wanted to put a 2D box collider, then I could just have one box collider instead of like 40 along the bottom of the screen. TM.
What? It's pixel art, Mark. I'm an artist.
I'm not an artist. Alright, what else are we doing? Doing the projects, I guess, TM?
Alright, let me just stop this a little bit here.